Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Daniel Gormaly, and today I want to talk about a game that I played against another player with a similar surname, Tom O'Gorman. That's an Irish name. Tom O'Gorman is an Irish player. I do have some Irish ancestry. Half of my family were from Ireland. So my grandparents on my dad's side were born in Ireland, but I believe they met in England. And my dad grew up in Hove with his relatives, and but yeah, there was an interesting family history. I talked to somebody on Facebook about that. So essentially my great granddad was called Patrick. My granddad was called Patrick, who I never met because he died in 1970. I never met either of my grandfathers. I met both my grandmothers, but neither of my grandparents, because they both died in the same year, 1970. It's quite sad. But yeah, my great grandfather worked for an English landowner in Ireland, and around about the time of the Irish Civil War, the English landowner was murdered, and he was warned. My great grandfather was warned to leave, that his sons would be next. So he basically sent them away to England. That's how they ended up in England. And yeah, I believe that I'm not sure about this, but I think my grandparents on the Irish side actually met in England, even though they're both from Ireland. Anyway, so I'm going to tell you about this game I played against Tom O'Gorman. He's quite a decent player. 2365. Recently became an IM. She told me after the game. Now, as far as I'm aware, Ireland haven't got any homegrown grandmasters. So they're obviously Baburin, Alexander Baburin, very strong player, who played on top board for Ireland many years, possibly still does. Might play slightly lower down now, because obviously you've got younger talent coming through. But he was always a dominant player in Ireland, but he was originally from Russia, so he wasn't born in Ireland. Now there were other players, so back in the day, Brian Kelly was considered to be quite promising, but he quit. I'm not sure what he ended up doing. More recent times, you had Sam Collins, and you also had Sam Collins was known to be sort of like well prepared, nice guy actually. You know, pretty solid, I would say, like all round. Didn't really have any weaknesses in his game, but he doesn't seem to play much anymore. The other player who's come through a lot recently is Conor Murphy, who's come and done amazing things, and he got a GM norm did an amazing performance for Ireland in Chennai Olympiad, I believe, a few years ago. However, he's slightly maybe plateaued a little bit recently, obviously, because maybe he's got other stuff going on in his life. But this guy, Tom O'Gorman, seems like maybe one of the most promising prospects they've had in Ireland for some time, because he obviously got a GM norm at the 4NCL. He had to win this game against me to get a GM norm. So I'm going to have a look at this. Yeah, so he's only recently become an IM, and now he's got a GM norm. So I'm going to have to show you this game, actually, if I can. And I was black. Wasn't completely happy about the opening. I think he did do a little bit of prep, but not a huge amount of preparation, possibly, because the line he played wasn't necessarily the most testing. So I've had this line before with B5, which gets very sharp, and I've got quite a good record with it. I think I've won most of my games I've had in this variation. So he played A4, and I went E5 because I thought if I go B6, maybe the idea is to somehow, because there is a Queen B6 resource with the pawn on B5. Like if they go Queen D5 here, you can go Queen B6. So I wondered if that was the idea. I didn't really understand the whole concept, but maybe you can go Rook B8 here and it's still playable. I don't know. But I went E5, which seems like a reasonable move because you're fighting for squares. See, maybe Knight C5 wasn't the most accurate here. Maybe there were other moves. Certainly here, I think, yeah, it actually only gives him, I think, around about this stage of the game. Even though after a5 it looks like my position is full of weaknesses, it only gives him about plus 0.6 at best. So it's not unplayable for black. The position is starting to resemble a little bit like a Rye Lopez or a King's Indian, because obviously one of the ideas I have is to break with f5. So I went f5. I was reasonably, well, I didn't feel completely happy. I just felt my position was a little bit weak. But, you know, obviously I've got some knowledge of King's Indian. King's Indian was one of the openings I first started playing when I was younger. So, you know, I wasn't completely unhappy. I thought if he goes f3, the question is, does black go maybe f4? You know, with the idea of going g5, the typical King's Indian attack, knight f6, g4. I don't know. I mean, computer would probably make this look very weak for black. It would probably go like rook b1 and then b4, and then it would somehow get into the queen side before I'm really, you know, you could look at a line like this and say, well, look, this is rubbish for black because rook b6 is a move maybe, or, you know, what is rook a6? Maybe bishop a3 is, you know, maybe black's going to creak somehow, maybe knight b5 actually, because yeah, although it still looks a bit awkward for white as well. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would have taken, I'm not sure I would have played f4 actually, to be honest. But he took, which slightly surprised me. I did consider taking with the bishop, but I think in that scenario white is fairly comfortable. Bishop e3 is possible, like the game, and I felt like, you know, white is very safe on the king's side now. Any moves like knight f6 can always be met with h3, for example, preventing knight g4 or maybe bishop e2. I mean, it's not unplayable for black, but I decided to take back the pawn, and we got this position. And he went rook b1. I was actually expecting knight b5 here, and I thought one idea is just to go here and here crudely, you know, and just you know, basically take advantage of black's weak squares in the position. Although thinking about it now, that would lose a pawn, right? Although b6 I suppose is hanging. So I was thinking about variations like this, but it didn't really convince me, because chopping wood is basically just going to increase the strength of knight e6. So I wasn't sure what I would have done after knight b5, possibly a move like king h8, not sure. Yeah, I mean, these kind of positions can collapse for black, but the knight on c5 is quite a good piece. That was the one thing that was helping me during the game, was that I was fairly optimistic about this knight on c5. It just seemed to be a good piece that was controlling a lot of squares, and he couldn't remove it very easily, because bishop a6 was played. He went knight b5 after all, but now I chop. And by this point I started to feel reasonably happy. After I played rook b8, I thought if he goes bishop d4, for example, you know, it's not a terrible move, but it looks a bit counterintuitive to exchange pieces, you know, because the more pieces exchanged, the more that knight on c5 looks like a good piece. You know, I think that's one of the golden rules. You know, when your opponent has good pieces, you don't want to exchange. You want to exchange off their good pieces. So we could consider taking here, but I think that would be a bad idea actually, because something like this, I could even consider if we just go and check. A knight f6 would be tremendous for black. Threats a knight g4, or taking on d5. So I don't think he ever does this. But bishop d4 was an option. Maybe the idea of bringing the knight back to e3 wasn't ridiculous. Maybe we could look at that later. So I went rook b8. One of the ideas behind rook b8 was just be able to move the queen. So I wanted to go queen d7 to f7, and then think about. Also, queen d7 does hint at the idea of taking on b5. Of course, he does have discoveries, but you know. So he decided to go knight a3. I thought by this point I was at least equal. I thought I was doing quite well. There are other moves he could try here, but I'm not sure they're that good. So I went knight f6, and he went h3. I was actually expecting bishop e2 to stop that, rather than going h3, which seemed to weaken that square, but I'm not sure it makes much difference. But bishop h3 is a more ambitious move, because then he wants to put the bishop on c4. So his strategic plan is to go bishop c4, knight c2, knight d4, which he kind of carried out in the game, and then exploit my weak squares. Maybe combine that with a b4. There's also maybe some ideas of going Leela style with g4, but I went queen d7 because now g4 isn't really an option for white, I don't think. So Tom went knight c2. I went king h8, just tuck the king away. It's the old advice, tuck the king away before going for the attack. Bishop c4, because if he goes here immediately I can go here. I think I can even sack the exchange here. I mean, maybe I can take on d1 actually as well, but sorry, rook takes. Yeah, that shows my score, which is pretty bad actually. I think I lost 4 games. 5 games. I lost 5 games. That's really poor. And 1-2. So it's a poor performance for me overall. I don't do well in the 4 and CL. It's very, very bad performance. Very disappointed with my performance. But yeah. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Yeah, and then obviously this is just d5. It's tremendous. This is probably winning for black already. You don't go for this variation as white. So bishop c4 of course was played. Went queen f7. Yeah, I mean queen e2, yeah, was a good positional move in some ways, but also gave me some hope because I thought maybe there's ideas. I did consider knight h5 here because I'm threatening bishop. Sorry, I'm threatening knight f4. So I thought you'd go queen f2, but then there are options for black. Yeah, maybe something like bishop f6 is possible. Followed by rook g8. I mean, you could analyse this position for hours. Like honestly, I probably will because it's a fascinating position. But I just wanted to really show you what happened. I went rook g8, and he went king h2, which again slightly surprised me because I thought that maybe that's walking into stuff. I'm not sure what I expected instead though. What else can he play? I mean, I think moves like knight e6. Oh, actually, maybe I was wondering whether he could just do that crudely. But it doesn't feel like this is better for black. Better for white, because I'm just going to go rook e8 and snaffle the pawn. So there's variations like this. Maybe he could get away with this, but I think this is just not good for white. I've got moves like rook d6. He's certainly not better. I think you avoid this variation as white. I mean, maybe you could play me like rook c1 instead and go rook c6 and claim compensation, but I'm not sure. But anyway, he didn't do that. Also, after knight c5, knight e6, another move was just to go here possibly, and I'm not sure. There's maybe even other options like knight d5 was also possible. That's possibly too much, but no, I think you can take that, right? Can you take that? But then queen e6. Not sure. But queen e6, yeah, it gets very murky. So I went rook g8 and he went king h2. Yeah, so again here I've got lots of options, like knight h5 was possibly quite a good option actually. I think I was worried about stuff here, but maybe queen f2, but then again, yeah, like bishop f6 for example. Threatening this, which is again something I missed. I should have spent more time here probably. Knight h5 looks very natural. I think that was even my knee-jerk reaction when he went king h2. But I didn't play it. So this is my kind of position, I think. You know, it's creative, it's like attacking, you know. Okay, there is a lot of danger for black as well because of, you know, I've got a lot of weaknesses in my position. A lot of my pawns are weak, like pawn on b6, pawn f5. So it's very, you know, it's typical King's Indian in a way. It's very dynamic, very double-edged. But that generally is something I do well in. But obviously not in this game because I lost. But okay, I went there, and he went there, and my first knee-jerk was to go there. But then I thought, what if he goes King h1? You got to understand what your right opponent's ideas are during the game. And wasn't sure about King h1 because if knight here, I thought his idea was just to go Queen e2, right? I'm thinking about it now. Yeah, I can't take. That's the point. And I thought if I go here, he goes knight f5. This is his idea, right? And I'm collapsing. So I need a move here. Maybe move like rook f8 was possible, you know. But then he can go king g1 and then threaten to take the knight. Threaten to take the knight with a pawn, sorry. So what do you actually play? So stuff like this I saw and I was like, yeah, maybe knight d3 was possible, but very sharp, very sharp. But I ended up not deciding against queen h5. Possibly queen h5 was a good option. Knight h5 was another option. Again, knight h5. But I went rook e8. My opponent went here. And apparently the best move, very, very difficult. The engine points out what the best move is, which is far from obvious in my opinion. Is to play the move. Again, you know, you might want to pause your computer here and think, pause the video and think, what's the best move for black? I didn't even consider this move during the game. I must admit, because you're looking to the king's side, you're not even considering about. Yeah, I did see this move earlier, maybe, but I didn't consider going a4 here. Apparently, a4 is the best move. Just doesn't really make sense to me because you feel like you need to do something quickly on the king's side. I think the problem is if he, let's say, goes knight g3 like the game. Maybe I'll just go here and here very quickly. I'm not sure. Another option instead of there was to go queen h5 anyway. That was also very interesting. Yeah, which actually probably should have seen. And I should have thought about a bit more because if king h1 then knight g4 is different now because then he hasn't got queen e2. So again, I'm kind of rushing it. And if he goes here, then I can go here. And he doesn't really want to take on f6. That just gives me too easy a time. So he's got to consider other moves. But yeah, apparently there's all like interesting sacks coming up like e3 and you start to get active. So I didn't consider any of that during the game. You know, my mind was a blank. And I went knight d3 and he took. But he from this point on, he outcalculated me. Even though I've possibly been outplaying him a little bit before that, now he started to outplay me because I started to collapse. So he went knight g3. And yeah, I think around about this point in the game I started to become very tired. You know, played on this. Obviously I played a lot of chess lately as well. I don't want to make excuses, but I kind of am making an excuse. But this is kind of what happened. I mean, I'm not making an excuse. I generally started to feel very tired during the game. And but yeah, it is kind of an excuse. It's kind of taken away from the opponent in a way, because obviously you don't want to detract from what your opponent did. But you know, on the Friday, obviously arrived on the Friday, played Saturday, but Saturday night I don't normally drink anymore, but I stayed up till 3:30 in the morning, which was really stupid. And then the next day I felt awful. And I was quite relieved when my opponent offered me a draw, so I accepted because I just want to get out of there. That was my birthday, May the 4th. So on the Monday, I've recovered. But obviously, yeah, so I felt much better during the game on the Monday. But at this point, then I started to feel tired. So maybe it was like a blood sugar thing or something like that. But I just had no energy left. And I made this point before that I generally, when the games get critical, I tend to get nervous. And also, another thing I should say is, you know, in theory there's more pressure on him. because he's the one trying to get the GM norm. But I also feel like I struggle as well in these tense games. You know, when your opponent needs to achieve something, because also lost to Richard Pert, who also made a GM norm. You're then dragged into that tension, if that makes sense. So, you know, I'll probably struggle with these tense games now against younger opposition. So there's all these factors in play, and this is where I completely collapsed, because I think I was just too tired to actually calculate variations. I was too tired to fight against my tendencies, which is to play too quickly in critical situations and not consider my opponent's resources. So yeah, he mentioned after game, why not take here? After bishop d4, for example, I thought he could just take. This is what I didn't like, and then take. This is why I dismissed his variation, because I thought if queen f6, then g4. But g4 is quite a weakening move. Maybe there's something here for black, like for example rook e2 is possible, and then just take on f4 at the end. Well, maybe doesn't have to take back immediately on e2, I'm not sure. I wasn't completely convinced about this for black. But again, I think I was just too tired to calculate any even now I feel too tired to calculate anything. But g4, you know, I kind of stopped around there. I wasn't completely happy with that. I just thought, he's then got 3 against 2 on 3 against 1 on the king side. You know, what happens if he hoovers off the d pawn? You start thinking about these worst case scenarios. But I'm sure the computer would say that queen f6 is fine for black. Probably other moves. But so that was the first variation dismissed. Another thing I've actually strongly considered it was taking. Possibly I should have done that, because if queen takes, then knight e4, which is annoying for white. I think if he goes here, then yeah, I wasn't sure about this actually. Or maybe I can just go rook g7. It's possible. Again, I should have considered, because I only looked at bishop g7. That's why I ended up dismissing it. Bishop g7, queen d3, and I didn't see a good discovery. Like bishop e5 just didn't seem to work, because you can just take it. But I should have at least considered rook g7. Again, too tired to really calculate properly, I think. Because just very bad calculations at the end of the game. So the other variation was rook e3, but then you go knight e4, you get, you know, it's not, apparently it's not very good after rook g3. I mean, I'm worse, but probably would have been better than the game, as the game turned out. So I kind of regretted later not doing that. From a practical perspective, might have been a better option. So I went knight e4, he took. Yeah, and I probably should have taken the pawn here again. I didn't see the danger. I could have taken the pawn. I think that would have been okay, probably unclear. I took the rook, which is still okay. Now he went here. I went here, he chopsies. Take, and then he played a move which I missed. So f5, which I'd seen f5, but I sort of missed how strong it was, and now I blundered horribly. So I'm under pressure, you know, he's just played f5. And what I missed earlier is I thought I had a queen takes g2 resource, thinking if king g2, there's bishop d4. And something like this. I thought this must be very good for black, because, you know, how's he going to stop my pawns? If rook d1 there's e2, if king f1 there's e2. Maybe he can still make a draw, but it looks very scary. Not sure about that variation, but the point is it's all ridiculous, because I suddenly realised I can just go queen g2, right? And then, well, this is just game over, obviously. You know, bishop e5 is going to come with check. So yeah, that's like a bad, and that kind of tilted me. As soon as I realised I miscalculated that, it kind of tilted me, and I started playing emotion, and I played this move very quickly. And I should have, of course, taken. And what I missed, yeah, I just got up to this point and just, right, that's it. I'm not interested in variation. I just lost my e pawn. I can't play this. But what I missed was that after queen e5, it's not so clear, because I've still got these two connectors. So obviously when you're really tired, you don't want to calculate a variation like this, which is really complicated endgame. but you have to. You got no choice because the alternative is far, far worse. So basically, I made a losing move here. F5, Queen F7. I played that fairly quickly, and it's really a total collapse. So he went F6, another great move, and I probably should go Bishop F8, but it looks horrible. I blundered again with Bishop H6, and he played a great move here, which I completely missed. Kind of obvious once you see it, but I just missed it completely, which was Queen H4. So you start missing all your opponent's moves. You know, I missed F5, missed Queen H4, and at this point, yeah, he seemed very calm as well. You know, normally people going for GM norms very nervous, but he seemed very calm at the board. So yeah, at this point now, I realised I'm done. You know, I started looking at really desperate stuff like what was I looking at? Yeah, there was lines where I could sack the rook. I'm trying to remember what they were. Oh yeah, Queen D5 here, and then you know, it was obviously getting so. I realised I was lost, so I was looking at lines like this, hoping that somehow they worked, but they don't work. I mean, I think for several reasons, but I think one reason is just to go Queen H5, for example, and you know, eventually White will figure out a way to win this because I've got no counterplay now. You can always stick. Oh no, hang on, there's Queen E5 and E2. No, Queen E5 doesn't work. Oh, actually, actually it does work because. But okay, I've defended that very badly. I mean, for example, here. Yeah, I mean, there's probably much better moves for White. For example, Rook F1 might be a move, threatening mate. It's fairly obvious. Yeah, that's just game over, right? Check, just move the king back. Yeah, so basically it was just desperation to even consider such a variation. So I went here, and now I realised the game was up. I can't take here because of the pin. I went there and he played Rook F1, which is a very classy prophylactic move. I mean, there's other ways to win, of course. You know, I think he moves like this, probably just going to win without much difficulty. Bishop C3 and gradually wind, you know, control that pawn. But Rook F1 was very nice because the point is that here you have this, and then it's game over. So it's just preventing any possible counterplay. This is a way to play strategic chess. I think he outplayed me strategically in this game. You know, got me in a kind of position where I wasn't completely comfortable. It was more strategic than sort of tactical. But at one point, I kind of changed that slightly, but I didn't continue the vibe. But I went Rook F8, and he went Queen G4, and yeah, it's just like game over, right? Because I can't move the Queen because my Queen is just blockading the F pawn. Queen's a very bad blockader. So Queen H4, and my bishop's trapped, so I have to defend it. And then he went F7. Well, apparently the best move is to Queen, but obviously that's just, you know, resignation time anyway. That's just hopeless because I'm just giving up. And then possibly play something like Queen. You know, you can hang on a little bit longer, but it's dead lost. But I'd sort of given up by this point. He goes Queen E7 and I resigned. So if we look at the game, enable, disable computer analysis. If you enable it, I don't know, my accuracy is probably about 92%, no less. It's quite a bad game by me. Normally I'm well over 90%. Even when I play bad games, I'm like 93, 92. But this is quite a poor game by me, you know, and I think it's just a fatigue factor was coming in. Yeah, so if you look at the earlier possibilities, for example, let's have a little look. Yeah, I did consider that F3 might have been a better option for him. What about F3? You can go F4, and we gave this line with Rook B1. A b4 is not the best apparently. Apparently you just go g4. When we take queen h4, the typical way you play I haven't played the kings in yet. I've forgotten how to attack these days. And if you go h3, you probably have moves like f3 in yet, or h5. Like h3 is too weakening. Yeah, f3 is going to happen. Like h5 is f3 even possible? Also possible. Wow, there's a line like takes and then knight d3. That's just crazy, right? Typical computer stuff, right? But h5 is very obvious, and in fact after g takes you go king h8. Yeah, so its main line is knight b6, rook g8, knight takes a8, bishop takes h3. That's crazy. Okay, so he took, which, yeah, I mean from human perspective is a safer option. So I was wondering whether bishop takes was possible. Doesn't love it. Okay. Yeah, maybe even f3 was an idea as well, but yeah, knight b5 or rook a3. Yeah, this is quite a nice idea by the computer. But bishop e3 look normal. Apparently, yeah, I could even go bishop a6 actually, because I thought that this was like a crushing threat, but it isn't, because you actually, even this is playable, which it doesn't look playable, it looks horrible for black, but surprising, yeah. So bishop d4, you go queen f6 and you're just fine. Yeah, looks scary to let this d pawn go through, but apparently not. Computer knows everything. We know so much. Yeah, I was worried about this move, which I think the computer doesn't mind, but it doesn't think it's that terrible for black. King h1 it loves. Maybe the idea of going bishop e2. Yeah, the computer would crush. Well, the computer would win from both sides, so it's kind of irrelevant. Yeah, rook b8 was the top move. Queen d7 was, knight f6 was top move. Queen d7 was fine. And at this point it's very unclear. It's just equal. Yeah, I should have, maybe I got bluffed out here, because I just thought, oh, you must have calculated all this. You kind of like, you judge from people's body language somehow, and he seemed very calm, and I thought, oh, he's obviously, I think you can trust people too much, because I don't think stuff like this works for him, yeah, because of knight e3. But it's true that, after a move like bishop f2, knight c3 is a move, again, something I should have considered. This is what I'm saying about the poor calculation. Maybe I'm just getting older now, and I just can't calculate that well, whatever my condition. I just feel like the fatigue affected my ability to calculate in this game. Knight h5, that's what I said, was a better option. Yeah, rook g8. Again, knight h5 maybe was, because the problem is when you move the bishop here, like eventually if he ever gets bishop d4, then you kind of need the bishop back on g7. So yeah, I should have considered this a bit more. I mean, it says his best line is to give up. What happens if he plays something like knight e2? It's not terrible, but yeah, it's starting to look a bit shaky for white. Yeah, so the best line is to give up pawn with g3, but I think from a human perspective that's very hard to play. So, so all this is kind of normalish. Yeah, and queen h5, that's what I said. Queen h5 was the best. And there's like weird lines like here. I mean, I mentioned queen h5 earlier, right? The king h1 is the best. Right. That's interesting. And then, yeah. It's just very murky. So knight d3 was, yeah, it said a4 was the best, right? Very positional. But I mean, from a human perspective, knight d3 is kind of natural. You want to, you're progressing in the position. What about knight d5? What did you think about knight d5? That's actually a bad move, because Oh, there's this. Yeah, not that obvious, to be honest. So we were both kind of wrong about knight. I thought it was maybe slightly better for him. He thought it was slightly better for me, but in fact we were both wrong. It's actually just clearly better for white. So you don't take the pawn. Knight e4. I felt it was fine. It looks like the most natural move. Yeah, I'd say like rook e3 was also an interesting option, but from a practical perspective. But I felt that was a good game decision. There was one thing I was happy with, that I didn't get tempted, because my old self would have impulsively taken on e3. I'm trying to make more sensible decisions in the game. Unfortunately, I only got this far, and then it started going crazy again. Yeah, so possibly I should play something like this. I mean, there's lines like this, because I think f5 just doesn't work so well now. You can just take. That was the point that e4 wasn't hanging, because you can just take on e4 now, aren't you? Why isn't rook e4 hanging actually? Oh, it is hanging, but you're worse because of this. Because white is worse. Yeah, that's quite a big difference. So again, there's a variation you should be able to calculate in the game, and it's so important when you're playing at this level to be able to calculate these variations properly. You know, these 2 or 3 move variations, and evaluating them correctly. So he said, I think he said after the game that he might have done something like this, which is very murky again. You know, he's a pawn up, but I've got these. You know, you could win this as black. Maybe queen f5. I would have gone queen f5. Not probably. I did consider rook c8 in some of these positions, but I probably would have just gone queen f5. Yeah, once you take there, I think you're kind of out of danger as black, really, practically speaking. But very, very murky. Could go either way. But yeah, rook e4 was not the best. It's still okay actually. And yeah, this is such a critical moment I have to take. So basically it was a well played game by him, and I stayed with him for like most of the game, but then I collapsed at the end, which is kind of like that's been happening in my career. If I can't fix this collapsing at the end problem, then I'm never going to make serious progress. It's always going to be up and down around about the 24-20, 24-430 level, 24-40. Never going to make serious progress to 2500, in my opinion. Anyway, another interesting game was, actually let me quickly show you the Richard Bates. So I think there's a lot of fatigue going on in some of these games, because Roberson had a great position. Was playing against teammate of mine, Richard Bates. So Richard plays for Blackpool. So Richard is not a full-time professional. He works for the Wandsworth Council, I believe. So he's got a lot more money than most of us chess players, because we're all poor, right? Well, he's just a normal human being, right? So whereas chess players aren't normal, we're all like poor and embittered. But Richard's quite a good player. I've known him for many, many years. I think I lost to him in Oldham, a tournament in Oldham, way back in the 1990s. I think I got my revenge in a tournament in Drury Lane in London. So it's just Charing Cross Road, actually. Drury Lane tournament. Way back in, yeah, sort of late 1990s. So we've had a lot of games over the years. But Richard's a nice guy. But I don't think he plays as much chess as he'd like to now. But he's always been a good player, you know, he's like a strong junior. So knight d5 was played. Roberson's someone I first played in the 4NCL when he was basically an unknown, and nice guy. But he's probably progressed past a lot of other IMs by now, and potentially he's got a good chance of getting to GM, but younger than me and Richard, I would say. So yeah, so this was so White was in control for most of this game, but made a really strange blunder like knight b4, and I think it's just fatigue, because Roberson would never make a blunder like that normally, and he basically just overlooked a very simple tactic. Rook c4, and black goes b5. Huge tactic, and to be honest, I think it shows how tired I was. I remember looking at this game and thinking, oh yeah, this looks quite good for black. But obviously it's completely winning. You know, the fact I didn't even understand it was winning. I just remember looking at these other games in kind of like a fog of fatigue. Anyway, so yeah, so this is completely hopeless for white now, and he resigned. Zoe Barney did well, so he got the GM, sorry, WIM norm. So well done to Zoe Barney. Another game I thought was worth looking at quickly was this game that Simon Ansell played against Amit Garc. Amit Garc is, you know, one of the strongest players in the UK. And again, not a full-time professional. He's got a full-time job, so it's quite sad that I'm not a full-time pro and I can't even be better than these amateur players. Right, very frustrating. You know, people like Roberson and you know, Garc are stronger than me probably. And well, certainly, I mean, probably I'm about the same as Roberson, but certainly Amit's better than me on paper. But he does work pretty hard on his chess now. I think he went through a period where he was a bit lazy. Not lazy, but obviously occupied with other things. But now maybe got more free time. And he prepares pretty well. And I think his repertoire's, because he's worked with Tristan Cox, maybe other people as well, his repertoire has become a little bit more impressive, I would say. So Simon Ansell said he was fairly happy about his structure. He said he had quite a lot of experience in his structure. I was thinking that black would go a4 actually. You know, that move would have worried me as white, but I think you just go bishop b2 anyway, and if you go a3 then you can just put the bishop on c3. So it's not really a problem for white. I think it's something like this. Yeah, actually maybe that is a bit annoying. Maybe, well, can you take? Oh, there's e6, right. Yeah, that's quite an important resource, because d4 there's always d7's hanging. So so basically white is okay here. One thing I'd say about Amit, he's quite a difficult person to play against because he never really gives you targets. Like when he's black, he often plays like modern systems. When he's white, often plays like knight f3, g3. He never really gives you any targets to hit. So he's kind of like keeps all his pieces, you know, away from you, I would say. So his basic strategy is to get into time trouble and then swindle you in time trouble from a lost position. He says without a trace of bitterness. No, but I think that is kind of an effective strategy. It's kind of like he's kind of like a counter-attacking strategy. He's a counter-attacking player, I would say. In a way, David Howe's a little bit like that. Like David Howe is somebody that is a very good player, but he gets a lot of wins from people who overstretch against him in time trouble, and they underestimate how good he is in time pressure. And I think Amit's a little bit like that as well. But he's also a very good positional player, you know. So this game was fairly solid from both people were playing really well, and Queen e3 was nice. That was a nice move. So black made a mistake here with King g7. So what is the best move here for white? What should white do? Well, a lot of it when you're thinking about strategy is you're thinking about what is your opponent trying to do, right? What are they trying to achieve? You know, what is black? If you're looking from a white perspective, you know, what is black trying to do over the next few moves? Now they might, for example, at the moment a knight on a6 can't really move anywhere. It can't go to b4. So it's been positionally controlled, you know, Karpovian style by Simon Ansell. I think also by this point in the game he'd actually offered a draw as well. Simon doesn't normally offer draws. I said to him after the game, I said, yeah, I think that's a mistake. You should have offered a draw. But he offered a draw. And I think that was a mistake, because I think it gives the opponent a psychological edge. And you know Amit's almost certainly going to turn it down. But he said it was a genuine offer. You know, I think it was a genuine offer. It was slightly better when he offered, so it's fair enough. But at this point in the game, yeah, you're thinking, what is black going to do? So black maybe wants to go knight b8. But also black might consider taking the knight, simply taking the knight, relieving some of the pressure. And in fact, he probably should have done that on the last move. He probably should have just taken the knight and then gone knight b8. The reason being because here that white can go now knight g5, and then white has good attacking prospects. You know, there's ideas like queen f4. I think both players are getting shorter time by this point. Queen f6 check. There's also bishop f3. So white is better, according to the engine. And of course both players are shorter time. So this game could have gone either way. Let's say they're playing me like knight b8. Like, how does it actually pan out? Let's say you just carry on. Because you're not worried about queen c6 here necessarily because of bishop f3. So knight b8, maybe bishop f3 anyway. But then you can take, right? But then maybe I could just take back the knight, I guess. And claim you haven't got knight c6 now because of queen c5. If you went rook d8, there's rook b5 now. And possibly I could have even gone rook b5 immediately, like in a position like this. Yeah, that also feels very dangerous for black, although there is rook d4. Another option is queen f4, taking queen f6, but then knight c6 is the problem, I guess. It's not so clear. Yeah, because let's say I go check, you come back. Do I have anything here? Can I boogie here? I'm not sure, because I'm wondering after this, is there anything here for black? If knight e5, this bishop takes b7. So possibly, yeah, there's lots of options like this, and probably all works out quite well for white. But it didn't happen. He didn't go knight g5. He should have gone knight g5. He went g4. Black took, which, funny enough, was a huge blunder. The computer says that's the worst move that Ami played the entire game, and this is why I wanted to show this game, because this next move by white, this next opportunity, white did not play the best move here. But freeze your video and think, what should white do here in this position? So this is so automatic. When you take on g4, you just think he was going to take that, right? I mean, and white obviously thought the same way. Now, even if white had more time, he might not have seen this next move. Like, it's just, I just think this is tough to find. I think it's tougher to find than knight g5 for certain. But white could have played. So congratulations if you paused your video and you found knight h2, which is a stunning move. It reminds me of some of these games I had against Leela recently, where it'll just sack a pawn and somehow find a way to attack your king. Yeah, so the basic idea is you're just going to take that with a knight. Very clever idea. So let's say we just crudely take. Well, black's in trouble. It's just dead lost, I think, because you probably have to go king here, right? And how do we actually win by force here? This feels like a knight f6 moment, right? Oh, there's rook d8 though. Yeah, it's not as easy to finish off as I thought, but I mean, at minimum I got perpetual if I want, which might well have happened, because if you say, well, I don't, you know, I've got very little time and I don't see a forced win, and I'm playing Ami, who's higher rated, then maybe I'll bail out, right? But yeah, what is the actual forced win here? There's also queen h3 anyway, just simply continuing the attack. Yeah, I mean, I'd feel very uncomfortable here if I was black, even sitting on an extra pawn. You know, with the king so exposed. We'll come back to that and show it in the computer analysis. But anyway, that was very strong. If queen c6, then f3 apparently is still. You're going to get the knight to g4, so black is in trouble. Brilliant idea, but white automatically took back. A very understandable mistake to make. Now I think it becomes awkward. So yeah, he's played that because he doesn't want to allow white perpetual check or rook h1. So queen e4 is an excellent move, because if you play a slow move like here, then rook h1 is very nasty. So you can't do that. So queen e4, excellent move by Ami. This is what I was saying about Ami in time pressure. He will find the correct moves. Queen e4 was a move he had to play, and he found it. And this is where white made it another possible mistake. He possibly should have gone rook b6, hit the knight, more forcing. And yeah, because black doesn't have time to go rook d2 like the game, or it's not as effective. But he went there, and that allowed a4. In fact, rook d2 immediately was strong. Sorry, I just come to the end of the position. Just quickly show you what happened. So white collapsed fairly quickly here because it was a very complicated position when you got no time, and suddenly black's got the initiative now in the endgame. The g5 was tremendous move, actually, just to prevent any ideas that white might have of playing king f4, or, you know, if you attack the rook, the bishop, maybe attacking the bishop's also winning, actually. But g5 was a very good prophylactic move, and then Simon resigned because knight e5 is coming. So if you enable the game, yeah, if you go back to that moment where he took on g4, knight h2, the best. So I was looking at this, and then this, but apparently you go check, you go check again, and then you go rook b3, and then rook b3 is the star move, right? I didn't see rook b3. So queen d8 is the best defense, but that's losing a piece. And queen c6 would be a try in a practical game, but apparently it's not enough. You just give loads of checks, and then you go bishop f3, and then you win. So tremendous game by both sides in some ways, but white had an opportunity to win the game. Yeah, and the blunder was bishop f1. You had to find this. It's quite a tricky defense. It's quite tricky when the game is turned against you. It's very tricky to suddenly find these defensive resources. Okay, so another game I thought was one last game we're going to look at, which was a game between. There was quite a lot of upsets. Well, not upsets, but yeah, Egleston. This was a tough match. And Egleston had a chance, actually. So he went down this line, which he said he didn't really know, didn't really prepare it very well. But his opponent, he did find the right moves, actually. Apparently these are like the top moves. So apparently you could just castle it. So David said to me later that he was worried about bishop a6. But apparently you can just go, was it queen b1? Or bishop c1, I think. I think it's bishop c1. This is actually still theory. Yeah, bishop c1, and then rook b1 or something. And you've still got very good play, even though you've allowed bishop a6, which in theory is going to decrease your attacking chances. It's still quite good for white. David played queen e2, which was fine. It prevents bishop a6, good prophylactic move. So yeah, so here, what would you do here as white? So this was the moment where David played a mistake, slight mistake. But what would you do if you were white in this position? How would you play? So he was thinking about a lot of options, but he came to the wrong choice, I would say. So I said after the game, what about a move like knight g5? You know, we were driving back, but I think castles is okay. I don't see any great options there, attacking wise for white. So it's not easy for black to consolidate the extra pawn because queen's out of the game. But you could put the queen somewhere like c5, or you could play maybe c5, bishop b7. You could bring the rook to b8. Problem is, how does white increase the pressure here? It's not obvious. You know, maybe h6 is going to kick the knight away. So I think the best option apparently was just to go c4. And let's say black castles. Yeah, apparently you're getting good play here. I must admit I have no idea why, but that's what you know, that's what the engine says. It's okay. We can come back to that anyway, check it with the engine. But he played f4. I don't really like that move. I just feel it looks a bit anti-positional. You're weakening your king when your king was super safe. And it's got some idea behind it. In a sense, it's holding up black's centre, so black can never really go e5 now. Oh, okay, so rook f3. So okay, that kind of makes some sense, right? You know, I mean, you look at this position from afar and you think this actually, yeah, this is attacking chances. But the problem is that queen can come back into the game very quickly. So rook g3, there's rook f7, good defensive move. Yeah, bishop a6, and then queen b2, rook f8, queen e1, trying to be creative. Yeah, you don't really have moves like h4, rook g6 doesn't work. You can't put the bishop on c3. You'd love to put the bishop on c3. So his idea is obviously to threaten bishop c3. That makes a lot of sense. Bishop f6, black prevented it. Oh, okay, so basically black gave back a pawn. So white obviously didn't want to play the anti-positional move here. Maybe he was also worried about just bishop c4, and black seems to be a lot better. Because it's just very compact position for black. White doesn't really have any attacking ideas. These pieces don't really create... There's also bishop h4. I mean, I would even be worried, is there a bishop h4 here? No, because I think there's this, right? Which I think black might not be completely happy about because threat of bishop e5. So I must admit I don't understand any of these moves, but queen e4 was... Yeah, so this is another critical moment where white could have defended a lot better. And I think this is a moment where sometimes you just have to accept, you know, in chess, you know, I made the same mistake in my game, that I didn't accept that, you know, you have to go down certain lines regardless whether you like them or not. And this was a moment where David just had to be more stubborn and just take the queen and go rook a3 and rook takes a7 was his best try. I think bishop d4 is okay for black though. Maybe. Is there something like rook a4 though? Not sure. Not sure if any of that works, but there's also rook d4 is a bit of a problem. It's probably more likely to happen. But yeah, this is the most stubborn. But instead he played, instead of taking, he played rook e3. That was a big mistake. So sometimes you just have to accept. He blundered because rook d4. So threatening the bishop, and if you take, in fact, there's no mate, but you can just take, and then you're hitting this. Yeah, so I think he just accepted it was game over at this point, and queen f4, rook f1 check's going to be winning, right? Yeah, it's a good game by black in some ways, right? But yeah, he played with 97%. You're hoovering people off, and David's only 8%, 87%. It's quite a big difference in quality of the moves, but yeah. So rook a b1 was actually best, or c4 was maybe best. c4, let's say you castle, I go here. I'm not bothered about losing the pawn because well, it is possible to take the pawn actually, take a second pawn. Interesting. And then the best move is h4. Crazy stuff. I mean, computers are just like, they're always speaking a different language to us, right? Like, who's finding h4 there? It's a very weird looking move. It doesn't seem to really help your attack, right? But the computer just feels like it's necessary to gain space. Maybe the idea is just go h5. I don't really understand it. But also, when black does this, now you've got a supported knight. It says a5 the best. Not worried about knight e6 because d2 is hanging. No, hang on mate, maybe knight e6 is a move. Yeah, because it's taken with check. Very obscure all this. Very tough position to play, I would say. But yeah, rook fb1. I would probably prefer that actually, because you're not losing a pawn. So you're basically just playing for compensation. You're pawn down, but that was quite a big mistake. It seems like black is one in control after this. Bishop a6, excellent move. King g1, too slow. You've got to return to that idea just to prevent black activating. Very tough to see. Yeah, so black could maybe have played bishop f6 instead. Maybe slightly more accurate. Bishop e4 was an excellent move. Typical David, he's very good at being stubborn and also finding good resources, I would say. Bishop d6, apparently that was the best. Just because then your king's super safe. Reminds me, I had a game against Freddie Gordon where I drew, but I had my bishop on g8 with the king on h8, king on h8, and it was very, very safe position. You know, then you could just play around in this position with no risk of your king getting mated. Yeah, and so the top line is something like this, and then rook d7. Boom. Yeah, I mean, again, computer stuff, right? But it makes some sense because bishop g1 is just so safe. White king is so safe. But he went bishop d6. Black took. f5 is top. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm finding f5. Who is finding f5? It makes some sense because if you take there, then it's kind of obvious that bishop's pinned temporarily. Tough to see, I would say. f5, if they take it, then queen f1. Jesus. Yeah, it's a very tactical game. So really it's sort of position where, yeah, I was criticising f4 earlier, but I think now, from a practical point of view, I don't think it was a bad decision. But it just maybe didn't exploit it well enough later. Yeah, so queen b2 was the best. Again, computer stuff. Queen e4 was a mistake. But now he has to take it. That's what I said. So best defence to do this and go into an endgame with pawn down. But the problem that black has here is this rook is very restricted. At least for the time being. But in fact, yeah, after this, yeah, that was actually a big mistake. You've got to go there and then, you know, which make actually that's the move I think I would have played actually, because at least it creates some threat against d7. I mean, queen g3 just feels it's a bad move. I think there's something where David could improve and needs to work on is the positional side of his chess. Like, I don't think like a David Howe, who's a good positional player, is playing a move like queen g3 there. It just looks too loose, right? So if he did a lot of work on the positional side of his chess and really controlling the game and controlling the opponent, then he wouldn't have played a move like queen g3. If I have to be completely critical. Anyway, I think that's enough chess for now. But yeah, that's my opinion. I think that Tom O'Gorman has got a good chance of becoming the second Gorm GM, possibly, and also becoming maybe the first homebred. I'm not sure where Conor Murphy is on the rating list these days, but he's obviously not a bad player himself. Let's have a look. Can we look up Conor Murphy? V-Day. I'll use the tablet. I think he's got one GM norm, as far as I'm aware. There's someone like Collins, or people just quit chess. That's the problem. Somebody said earlier, you know, what do GMs do as a day job? You know, do they go to an office? Is there like a GM office? Somebody was making this point on Reddit. Well, there's no GM office, right? You just basically just do your own thing, and people are just generally very self-sufficient. But no, there isn't one. And yeah, but that's why a lot of GMs or like, you know, IMs or whatever, people who are still playing, they tend to be people who are, you know, full-time pros in some ways. Like probably the majority are doing coaching. I don't do that much coaching. Nobody ever asked me. Connor Murphy, FIDE. Connor O'Donnell, Irish as well. I think he's also quite a good player. Let's have a look. Connor Murphy, sorry. I think he might have more of an English accent because he spent more time in England, sorry. He's an international master, but he's 26. So he's 24.39. I do believe he has got GM norms though. At least one. So yeah, it's tough now to get to 2500. So people get demotivated. You don't. So I would say to Tom O'Gorman, you got to keep working because you don't. You got to keep propelling yourself to 2450, 2460, 2470. Now he's on a roll. He's got to keep it going. So obviously I finished that game. Then got a lift to York. Then got the train from York to where I live in Northumberland. On the train journey from Newcastle to Almouth, these kids got on. I went to the toilet. When I came back from the toilet, my book had disappeared. Right, I was reading this book on Hitler's final days in the bunker. Ironically, right. So I think he died in something like April the 30th, 1945. And because I find all that Second World War history fascinating. Anyway, I went to the toilet, came back from the toilet, my books disappeared. So I started saying to these kids who were like, basically the carriage was more or less empty by this point, it's hardly anyone on the train, right? These kids were on the next seats, and I said, have you seen my book? You know, and they said, oh no, yeah, well they said, they mentioned something about somebody might have taken it. And then other people on the carriage confirmed that. Anyway, so the kids started pointing out these other people sitting further down the carriage. So I went up to this guy and like I said to him, did you take my book? So I was, you know, and then I went to this other, I must have seemed like a crazy person. I went to this other guy sitting there with his girlfriend and said, did you take my book? Oh, they both denied it. The guy said, yeah, you can search my bag, you know, I didn't take your book. So I think what it was is those kids, then I started talking about going to the train guard to like report a theft because they're basically taking my book, right? Somebody's taken my book, you know. That's never happened to me before. I've had people take my seats before when I've gone to the toilet, but that was on a train to Manchester, ironically, and they were obnoxious. And funny enough, I was reading a book about the Second World War there. I was reading The Final Solution by David Cesarian, but never had anyone take my book before. And they have CCTV on these trains, so I was like talking about going to get to train guard. So I start walking down the train. I think at that point those kids started panicking because when I walked down to another carriage, one of the kids pointed out a book on an empty seat. It said, "Is that your book?" I'm like, "Well, you've taken it, then, haven't you? Because why would it come all the way down here to the other part of the train?" But he denied it. He said, "I've helped you get the book." So I think what it was another person with them that I didn't see at that time who was actually on the train. Because when I got off the train, he was with them, like slightly older than them, and he was wearing like a baseball cap. So that was what the other people on the train spotted. But it's drama that you don't want, you know, whether they're doing it as a wind up or whatever. I think it was more like a wind up just to piss somebody off. They're just idiots, basically. But yeah, you don't want it. You're stressed and you're tired because I've been playing, you know, I've been playing a lot and traveling a lot, and then, you know, you're annoyed because you did badly over the weekend, scored 1 out of 3, didn't win a game. Anyway, how did David do on his, hang on, let me go back to that. If you look at that, he started well. He beat Elmira. His performance, he did gain rating over the thing. He drew with Lucas. That's quite a high rated player. Beat John Cox. Drew and Makar was also a good result, but then lost to Roddy. That was his worst result. Lost to Roddy. Got slaughtered in that game. Then he drew with Yavanka. He then beat Dave, and yeah, so he had a good weekend the previous weekend. He drew with Roland Bezadenho and then lost to. Yeah, so overall slight game. Another player who got a GM norm was Richard Pert. So if you look at his performance, gained 20 points. So he performed certainly up to round 9 at 2600. He did have a lot of whites. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 whites and only 3 blacks. I don't really agree with that strategy. I think you should do it fairly, in my opinion. You should have a more or less an equal number of whites and blacks, but it's not as bad. I think Ray Keane got a GM norm one time where he had pretty much every game was white or something like that, right? But he gained a lot of points, so he's comfortably over 2400. Simon Williams, he won final game. He gained overall, gained 10 points. How did Nick Burt do? Go back to that. Had a bad, yeah. So people who haven't played much, often struggling. How about Fernandez? Lost 6. Overall, that's overall the season though. Possibly on the weekend he did well. Yeah, he would have done well over the weekend because he got a draw and 2 wins. So he must have done very badly before that. Yeah, he lost him. Very up and down player, Fernandez. And Tom Gorman gained 24 points, so he'll now be over 2400. Well, he must have been over 2400 before, otherwise he wouldn't have got IM. What about people like John Spielman? He lost a load. Shreyas, about evens, the same. Not sure what that means. Somebody else, maybe Mark, has struggled a bit. Yeah, he's been struggling a bit lately, but I think he will come back. Yang Fan. What about Zoe? How many points did he gain over the course of the season? 68. Wow, that's a huge number of points. It's crazy. Bonkers. What about our good friend Keith? How did he do? No, he actually lost points over the season. Jonathan Parker dumped some points. Nina Pert, bad season, lost too many games, but did have a good result in the final game. How did that game go? I don't think Nina does much work on her chess, according to what Richard was telling me. So she's a bit of a lazy talent when it comes to chess. So I think if she knuckled down a bit, you know, like Max is doing a lot of hard study, and he loves following chess, he loves looking at the tournaments, he's a proper player. I think Nina is obviously a proper player herself, but seems to, you know, maybe she hasn't progressed recently because he's not working as hard on the chess as she should. So actually at this point David Fitzsimmons is doing pretty well. It's like another King's Indian type position, but Nina's defending well. Queen a6, good move. Queen d4. Trying to repeat. So she probably would have taken a draw at this point, yeah. Queen c7 was a mistake, should have gone queen d6. Very tough game. Queen d4, excellent move. So she defends pretty well, right? She's mentally strong, like the Perts are generally as a family. They're quite mentally strong. And that was a blunder as well. Queen a4 was a blunder. So queen b1 was a better move. So really she ground him down, I would say, with great defence. But that's the way you would say. And maybe surprising that he didn't win the game, but possibly, you know, if you don't see a way forward, even if you're better, maybe just take the draw. Maybe he should have maybe his mistake was just not taking the draw earlier. Anyway, that's enough. Thanks for watching. So that's a roundup of the 4NCL effectively, but that was the game I wanted to show, was Gorm versus Gorm. Thanks for watching the chess. Please leave your comments down below. Please like and subscribe.